The following feature presentation is part of the Skywalking Network.
Welcome to Star Warsologies, the podcast about science, technology, and other academic fields of study seen in Star Wars. I'm one of your hosts, James Floyd. I'm a freelance writer for StarWars.com and Star Wars Insider Magazine.
And I'm your other co-host, Melissa Miller. I am a science communicator and also write articles for Star Wars Insider Magazine. On this episode of Star Warsologies, we're going to chat about wildlife and biology as represented in Star Wars by various wildlife, critters, and environments from Tatooine to Tauntaun. Our guest expert today is Sam Wynns. She is a conservation biologist and a science educator for the National Park Service, working here in San Diego at Cabrillo National Monument. Welcome, Sam.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for being on the show.
It's really exciting to be involved with you again, James, in a quote unquote professional manner, if you can call fandom being professional, because we met in the way back, and then we bumped into each other this year at Comic-Con Special Edition, and here I am. So it's a pleasure to see you again and to hear your voice and to geek out with you once again.
Yes, it's awesome to have you. And I did go to your panel at Comic-Con Special Edition, which was great. And that's why we wanted to have you on the show. So let's start with a definition of conservation biology. How is it different from other fields of biology?
A biologist is someone who studies life, right, at every level. So from the most microscopic bacteria, all the way to the biosphere and everything in between. And there's various different branches of biology. Of course, you get your molecular cellular biologist, you have your geneticists, you get your ecologists, et cetera. But a conservation biologist is really concerned about studying that life so that you can better preserve and protect it, so that you can keep it from going extinct. And so finding ways to help that wildlife to survive and thrive on planet Earth.
And there's definitely a lot of potential for that to be applied to Star Wars.
I mean, obviously, there's a lot of creatures in Star Wars, a lot of really interesting creatures, a lot of really amazing planets with different ecosystems and different climates, right? And a lot of different species interacting with each other. So when you're kind of asking that greater question of like, how does Star Wars bring science to the public? People don't realize that there's pretty much science in everything we do, from the medicine we take to the car we drive, to obviously computers, the internet, the cell phones we use, but even to analog forms of entertainment, right? Like reading a book made of paper. How does ink stick to the page, right? It's through science. I mean, science fiction is really no different when you think about it. Science fiction is imaginative, right? As is science. I don't know if people think about that when they think about science, but imagination is key. Discoveries happen because someone used their imagination to think differently about something.
Or they're curious. They want to know what will happen or how does this work?
Yes, exactly. To ask a unique question, right? So yeah, I think science and science fiction are very closely interrelated in that regard.
Did you grow up watching Star Wars? Was it part of your childhood and professional interest now too?
Yes, definitely. Everyone always discusses or even argues about what constitutes their Christmas movie. Well, episodes 4, 5, and 6 are my Christmas movies, right? They're my feel-good movies that I go back to whenever I'm sick or on a holiday. So I'm a huge fan of the original trilogy and also a big fan of some of the, kind of extended content like Star Wars, The Clone Wars. Big fan of Ahsoka. Loving The Mandalorian, looking forward to the new shows. So yeah, Star Wars has been a part of my life since I could remember, frankly.
Which planet or environment seems most appealing to you if you had to go out and study it and catalog it and figure out how to protect it?
Oh man, do I have to choose just one?
Good question. I've thought about this before too, because I feel like when there's a galactic war going on, there's probably not a lot of resources. So I think as a conservation biologist, you'd probably be assigned to like an area, not a whole rim necessarily, but maybe like a dozen planets or something.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, when I think about my career path in the Star Wars universe, I have kind of a bit of an existential crisis. And what I mean by that is, does my field even exist in a galaxy far, far away? And do I want it to? Are there conservation biologists in this galaxy? and there's no longer a need for them? Like, did they get it all figured out? For instance, they're probably not burning fossil fuels on any of these planets, right? And as we know, climate change is one of the big reasons, big causes for loss of biodiversity. Incidentally, I'm probably in one of the only careers where the experts in this field hope that it ceases to exist. Like, I really hope that my job eventually goes away, because that means that there's going to be no longer a need for conservation, right? That we've got it figured out and we're actually taking care of our natural resources.
Hoping you're out of a job. Well, I bet in Star Wars, they aren't out of a job, because there is always invasive species entering planets and thus endangering the endemic species. What do you think that's like? When you have galactic travel, are there any native species after a while?
Yeah, this is actually one of the questions I think about a lot, because, I'm a nerd when watching Star Wars or thinking about Star Wars.
Welcome, nerd.
Yes, exactly.
You are safe here.
My people, hooray. Yeah, because how do you even define what an endemic or native species is at that point? Are there any native species left, or have they all been naturalized? Are there invasive species that come and wipe it out? I mean, are there conservation biologists keeping track of that? Or have they just kind of given up? Are there protocols in place to take care of that?
Yeah, did Chewbacca fill out a form to take porgs off of Acto to Batuu? I don't think so.
He did not. And now Batuu is overrun with porgs. You can just walk around Black Spire and just buy porgs now. Thanks a lot, Chewie.
Exactly. No respect for native ecosystems, right? What's that all about?
And you can get them and bring them to your own planet and invade them. It's like tribbles, but they can fly.
So true. See, and this is why I try to keep the glass half full, right? And, think that there's no longer a need for this. Technology has advanced beyond these sorts of necessities. We figured it out. We know how to conserve various different species.
Yeah, they also blow up planets. So
so
that's not good for wildlife.
You're totally right. And so honestly, I try to be half full, but it's probably half empty. Let's just be frank about it.
Yeah, I was definitely trying not to be a downer, but all of the examples I could think of, and maybe this is just because I recently watched A New Hope and all I could think about was on Alderaan, yeah, sure, billions of people, but also every single species that was endemic there, every plant, every gorgeous natural feature. I feel like based on the people we know from Alderaan, there were national parks, and once in a lifetime sort of sites, and just gone.
Melissa, I have to say, you're definitely touching on something that is a theme as a conservation biologist, where it's actually, we do it because of the mission and we think it's so vital and important, because it is, right? We're in our 6th mass extinction event right now. Sorry, downer, but it's true. And there's about 1 million of the 8 million species of plants and animals at risk of going extinct right now. So it can be a kind of depressing job, right? When you're looking at this data day in and day out, trying to save species from going extinct. So I think maybe you have a little budding conservation biologist in you that you think this way when you look at that, because that's what I always think about. I'm like, oh yeah, those poor people. But the rest of the species on that planet, they had no choice. They weren't making these decisions and they just got caught in the crossfire, like what's happening right now on planet Earth.
Well, I think there's also some good news out in the Star Wars galaxy for that. There is the new Galaxy of Creatures shorts on YouTube for kids. It introduces the Galactic Society of Creature Enthusiasts. So there's a little droid out there making wildlife documentaries, and it's kind of like look at them in their native habitats, but also let's see if we can get them to do something. And it's a little bit kind of like, it's like, hey, can we train porgs to do a trick, or teach a Vorpak to be a good guard animal, or how do you play fetch with a charhound? So it's very much biology and wildlife, but also a little bit of that Steve Irwin. Watch me really get this croc all riled up.
Yeah. And actually, I'm going to add this to my queue. Thank you for mentioning this. I didn't know this existed, and this sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, I wanted to like it more than I ended up actually liking it, because as James sort of describes, it introduces this society and that's great. But then, yeah, all of the missions were basically something to do with like domesticating the animals and not just witnessing and learning. But, it's for kids. They're like 2-minute videos. They're very cute. I'm trying to like take it for what it is and not be like, trail cameras or whatever, should just be helping us learn native distributions and mating habits and those sorts of like filling in those question marks and stuff like that.
Well, they also do try to stop some poachers in one episode. So
that's true.
Speaking about mating habits, which creatures in Star Wars do you think have like weirdest mating habits?
Yeah, that's a really great question. What's funny is when I look at Star Wars organisms straight through a biologist lens, it actually just begets more questions, right? Like I need more information. So when you first approached me about this, I was like, oh, what will I talk about? And then I ended up getting into this really deep conversation with my husband that lasted for like 45 minutes about the sarlacc. And I was like, oh yeah, we're going to have plenty to talk about. Let's think about the sarlacc, right? There's so many things, so many questions I have about this species. But first of all, how does it reproduce? Where are those sexual organs? Does it disperse its gametes into a medium?
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be moving anywhere to find a mate. So
exactly. So I'm thinking maybe wind dispersal.
Ew, that means when you're walking around on Tatooine, you're breathing in those things. Yes. It's like breathing in pollen. It's tree sex everywhere. Well, now there's sarlacc sex everywhere.
Because people be allergic to sarlacc pollen or whatever, the way that we're allergic to tree pollen.
And which that means then that there's got to be, unless it's the only sarlacc left, maybe you all know the answer to this, or maybe there's some lore out there that I don't know.
I hope it's not the only sarlacc left.
They're cool. I like the idea of them. It means that there has to be other sarlaccs, if it's wind dispersal, right? Somewhere in where wind currents can take this. So probably not on the other side of the planet. So
maybe they live or they come from another planet where they're much closer together. And this one just got stuck on Tatooine and is all alone. And so it's like, normally they can, with their underground parts can find other sarlaccs by, sticking out tentacles or something. Who knows? Melissa's looking something up.
I know, because I can't help it, because I have a field guide to Star Wars. And Terrell Whitlatch, who we'll hopefully have on the show at some point. It's very much like anglerfish, actually, according to this book, in that the male is very small and basically parasitic and attaches itself to the female.
Okay. See, it just like now I have more questions.
Exactly.
But James, you do bring up a good point. We've already established that they just don't care about they don't have stringent protocols for invasive species and the like, and they're just bringing species from planet to planet willy-nilly. So maybe they did come from somewhere else. I don't know.
Yeah, or maybe it's stowed away somewhere.
Study is needed.
Further study is needed. All right, Sam, you get to go poke the sarlacc with a stick.
Exactly what I want to do. I've got my binoculars ready. I've got some data sheets. I'm good to go.
Well, maybe if you worked with Jabba, he can just throw some people in and then you can fill out your data sheets.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we have, trail cams for, and drones, and I'm thinking of like the fake like dummy penguins or whatever they put, or birds that they put out with cameras on them and see what mates with them, kind of thing. There's all sorts of ways to do this.
Well, and if it takes how many years to digest? 1,000? So like clearly their stomach acid is not hydrochloric acid, right? I mean, their stomach acid must be a weak acid. So, whatever equipment you throw in there, or people, hence Boba Fett, right, can survive in there for a while. So take some data until it gets too uncomfortable and then, crawl back out.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I always wondered how the sarlacc was going to keep Han Solo alive for 1,000 years while digesting him, right? Because I don't think humans in that universe live that long. No. So it then, I can see the keeping you alive, but keeping you alive unnaturally long I was always.
Yeah, maybe it keeps feeding nutrients into your body. So your brain could be dead, but it's keeping your body alive. And so you keep respiring and building up more mass, which it then feeds off of. So it's like you're a never ending food source because it doesn't get food that often.
But then we have to worry about cell death, right? Like apoptosis, which is the natural course of life. And our cells really only live so long, especially without being generated. I don't know.
Right.
I don't see more and more questions.
More questions.
Yeah, it's like real science. Whenever you answer a question or you think you answer, you get some good data to support your hypothesis, right? At least 10 other questions open up, more pathways of exploration. But can we talk about crate dragons for a second?
Sure.
Yes.
This is the thing that I often think about. Like if Star Wars were to get something wrong in nature when it comes to species, I think the greater crate dragon would have to be the example. Because how does an organism that large fly? What are their adaptations for flight? So first of all, what's the oxygen content of Tatooine? Because we know that there's a correlation between size and oxygen content.
Really?
And then,
I did not know that.
Yeah. So this is why in one of the previous mass extinction events, it used to be the land on Earth anyways, of giant insects the size of VW bugs and the like. There was like 30% more oxygen, I think, in our atmosphere. So, support them, like animals that large and that heavy. So unless there's a super high oxygen content in Tatooine, which humans are just kind of living their life there and not really struggling, because there is such a thing as like oxygen poisoning, just like water poisoning, right? If you have too much of it. So probably not all that high. So then when you think about it, like, do the crate dragons have hollow bones like birds?
No, they tunnel through sand and rock. So being able to push that out, you'd think they'd be really dense.
So, I mean, backtracking, just one quick question.
Yeah.
Do crate dragons fly?
Don't they?
We never see them, right? I mean, I haven't watched all of the Clone Wars, so I could be wrong, but I'm just like, wait a minute, they're called dragons, but I never assumed they could fly.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Did they fly in The Mandalorian? Gosh, now I have to watch the first
Not
one.
really. They just kind of leap out and they come out of the ground like
it's very Tremors style.
Yes, the Tremors things.
Ooh, I have to look at this. I thought they flew. I thought they had wings, but I could totally be wrong.
We can certainly keep talking about this. I don't want to undermine the premise because there are large things that they do show flying, I think, in Clone Wars and stuff. But I just I never thought that crate dragons could fly. So I've never had this question. I've met many other questions.
Well, we have Toydarians flying like Watto. His wings are clearly not big enough for sustaining that weight. They say his belly is full of a lighter than air gas, but he's got to be like as light as a helium balloon or something to stay up.
Exactly. And he'd probably also have to have hollow bones. So this is what you have for birds, right? Their adaptations for flight. They don't even have teeth. They've got keratin beaks, and keratinized beaks are far lighter than calcium carbonate teeth, for instance. So like their primary adaptations are for flight. And this is why elephants don't fly, incidentally, right? Like they're too heavy. You need to have really thick bones to support something that much mass, right? That much weight. And then you're just too heavy. Like even when you look at wing loading, right? Your wings would have to be so enormous, not tenable.
In Game of Thrones or, even cartoons or whatever. I'm like, I don't think those wings are big enough for that large animal. Yeah. But I never considered that there may be birds.
I have to go back now to the Star Wars universe and look up all the creatures and see which flying animals are too big. Like the wing loading is it just would not work.
Well, on Kashyyyk, there's those like kind of giant dragonfly things, I think called cancels. And, maybe they have a really high oxygen content atmosphere, like you say.
It's possible.
So a question that came up at our Comic-Con special edition panel that we speculated on, it was an audience question, was basically what's the deal with the crystal foxes in The Last Jedi? What would make a supposed mammal, make that sort of wind chime noise? And I think we sort of talked ourselves around in a circle and got to maybe they have some of the salt sort of on their hair fibers for some sort of reason, some adaptation. And then that's what makes the noise. But I'm curious.
And if you're wondering about that conversation, that's episode 11, I think.
That's right.
Yeah, I have no idea what the deal is with the crystal foxes. They're a bit of an enigma to me.
Could they be exuding salt, kind of sweating it out, and somehow it binds to them and grows? Yeah,
that could be it. I don't know if it would be so crystalline, though. I mean, I don't know, but it depends on what type of salt. Salt's a generic term, right? So I don't know. Seabirds like albatross, they actually drink seawater. They're called tube novices. They have a very special adaptation where they can excrete those salt molecules. So basically turns it into fresh water in their body. It's pretty amazing. So maybe they do have some sort of adaptation where they can drink or eat salt or, something that's too salty. And what do they eat? I don't even know.
I was thinking just about the sort of decoration. There's like decorator crabs, which I think that actually has some sort of like camouflage abilities. Maybe they just roll in the salts to blend in with their environment, or maybe the male with the like glitteriest coat gets all the ladies. There's lots of reasons that
check out my bling, ladies.
Yeah, my salty bling. Maybe there's some sort of parasites on their fur and rolling around, see lots of large mammals do with mud and dirt. So
that could be really cool. That's a completely different angle we hadn't thought of.
Yeah, I think if nothing else, this would be an easily answered question. If they decided to fund this proposal, send someone to create, because we see just in the course of a few hours that they sort of bond, they tolerate human presence. So I feel like you'd figure this out pretty quickly, as opposed to, say, the ice spiders or whatever, which immediately try to kill you if you so much as, eat one of their babies. So I guess that's a little bit disruptive. So maybe they had a point, but a little bit less dangerous, maybe the crystal foxes.
True. But, there's lots of wildlife biologists and other researchers that research very dangerous animals. So I'm sure they'd find a way. But yeah, you're right. We need some samples. We need some observations.
Yeah, one of the things we've just talked about in general is, what do they eat? We have these really big creatures on planets where it's like, what is the food chain here? What is the food web?
I always wonder that about Tatooine, just because, living in San Diego here, the desert's sort of the go-to camping destination, and there's not a lot of big creatures there. There's some skinny coyotes, but there's nothing like banthas. There's nothing like dewbacks. Same sort of issue with Hoth. There's no tauntauns that I know of. Well, I guess their polar bears are big. So, but yeah, it just, these harsh environments you think of as being sort of small, really specifically adapted creatures.
I'm really glad you brought up Hoth, actually, because I think Hoth is something that they get pretty right. And here's why. So think about it. Tauntauns are kind of synonymous with caribou or reindeer, if you're in Europe. And wampas are kind of synonymous with polar bears. In really cold climates, you tend to have large mammals. And in fact, mammals get bigger in cold climates, which is why people from Scandinavia tend to be larger than many other people around the world.
And that's why Siberian tigers are the largest tiger species, and not the ones that are like Sumatran tigers and stuff that live in hot areas.
Yeah,
cool.
Exactly. And the reason why is, first of all, you don't have a lot of reptiles in those areas because they're ectothermic, right? They need outside heat sources to warm their body. So you have a lot of endothermic animals, lots of mammals. And they're larger because there's a smaller surface area to volume ratio, which helps reduce heat loss. So that's why, polar bear is the largest bear in the world. They live in those cold climates, for instance. So this is something called Bergman's rule for you super nerds out there. So I actually think that that's actually probably pretty prevalent. The tauntauns, looking at their physiology, looking at their anatomy, I'd say they're probably grazers, right? Herbivores, much like caribou do. And caribou still eat in wintertime, right? They actually are heavy enough that they stomp through the ice and find lichen and other, dead grass and stuff under the ice.
Wow. So there, I had seen things about the tauntaun eating lichen. That is based on real world caribou and reindeer.
Yeah, just so, right? And then you've got your predators, right? The wampa or the polar bear, right? That prey upon a lot of these animals. So yeah, I think Hoth's the way to go. But Tatooine baffles me because what the heck are dewbacks eating and banthas eating? I really have no idea. I guess if you're watching Boba Fett, Book of Boba Fett, those watermelon things.
The urchin.
Yeah.
The little gourds.
There's gourds. So maybe there's all kinds of different gourds buried in the sand that they, can somehow sense and dig up, just like the caribou do with lichen. So there's one hypothesis.
Do you think Bergman's rule applies also to deep sea creatures? Would that explain why the biggest things in Naboo are the ones in the deepest parts where it might be coldest?
You got it, right? So when you're thinking about marine mammals, for instance, your largest seals tend to be Arctic or Antarctic seals. And it's that exact same reason. They live in those colder waters. So they have to have that smaller surface area to volume ratio.
Would that work with ectothermic creatures as well? I guess it doesn't matter for them.
No, it doesn't matter for them, but there is a limitation to the climates that they can live in, right? You do see some reptiles in colder climates. There are some snakes, for instance, that you'll find in places like Montana and Alberta that actually basically almost freeze solid in the winter and then thaw in spring, which is pretty incredible adaptation there. But it's hard living for them in those cold climates where the sun isn't out for a large portion of the year.
I'm now just imagining a horror movie where, the snows melt and there's just snakes all coming back to life and, terrorizing somebody.
See, to me, that sounds like a romantic comedy. I mean, I am known as the snake charmer at work, right? I do a weekly snake talk, and that's one of the organisms that I actually study. I used to lead our herpetofauna monitoring, which just is a fancy word for reptile and amphibians. So I love me some snakes. So to me, that would be amazing, but each into their own.
I'm curious, we talked a little bit about habitat loss and climate change. There's obviously the really extreme example in Star Wars of the city planet, right? Coruscant being completely paved over. At least in this wildlife book I was talking about, they just show pets for Coruscant. There's not, or Dianoga. Right? There's some sewer monsters, but that's about it. But there's also different, levels of that. The Empire building their shield generator station on Endor, had to pave over some things. What is moisture farming doing to Tatooine?
Yeah, no, I think about that too all the time when I watch Star Wars. And in fact, I hate Coruscant for the very reason. And first of all, can I just say, it just seems like a nightmare to live there. I am not really a big city person. Like San Diego is definitely kind of my maximum. And we have lots of open spaces here. And so just to be surrounded by that press of, well, I would say humanity, but there's all kinds of life forms. The noise pollution has to be terrible. Maybe they have technology to completely block that out, but it stinks. You can't even go outside without all that noise pollution, right? But also, you're right. Unless that planet was entirely devoid of life, like even bacteria, like some sort of destitute moon, they came in. That is like the greatest example of industrialization ever. And in the world of conservation, habitat loss is the number one reason for biodiversity loss, is the number one reason for species going extinct. So they probably wiped out a whole bunch when they built their, planet of city.
Yeah, so, probably the only wildlife left are basically the things that can live in urban environments, the rats and feral cats and concrete slugs and
cockroaches
and weird bird things that can feed on those things.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And people's pets, of course. And then probably people's pets who've escaped and are now procreating like crazy out in the sewers.
I'm now just imagining, in San Diego, we have these wild flocks of parrots over some neighborhoods. Now I'm imagining some neighborhoods in Coruscant just have wild flocks of escaped exotic birds.
Yeah, again, more study is needed. Again, I think we've just covered that maybe they don't care at all about conservation. I'm really bursting my glass half full feeling here.
I'm sure there's lots of places where they do, and they'll say this is a pristine moon, and if the right people can find it first, it might get protected. Whereas if some corporation goes in and is like, it's a pristine moon, we can harvest it for resources. Versus it's a pristine moon, we need to protect this environment and carefully screen ships before they land so they're not introducing zebra mussels or brown rats or all kinds of crazy invasive species.
You know who they need to be in charge of that pristine moon? They need the government of New Zealand. Because I don't know if y'all know about this or not, but in the world of conservation, New Zealand is pretty legendary. They actually have a Department of Conservation in their federal government, and they actually hold a lot of clout. They take invasive species very seriously there. So when you fly there, they spray your whole plane down. And whenever you travel to, their little offset islands, they check your bags, make sure there's no, hitchhiking ants or anything like that. And you have to scrape your boots on these scrubbers.
Yeah, no dirt.
Yep. Yeah. No, when I arrived, the only time I've been to New Zealand, I showed up on a research cruise. There was all sorts of stuff with the engineers about like the bilge water, like where did we fill the water tanks and, how far offshore did we have to go if we were going to dump them because we were taking on fuel and stuff like that. And I remember being like, oh, I'm glad that's not my headache because I'm not the engineer, but.
Oh yeah, that is, I'm sure it was a pain for the engineer, but I'm so glad they thought of that because that actually is, I'm sure, as you know, Melissa, is one of the biggest culprits when it comes to introducing invasive species. You take on water in one area of the world, and then you release that water somewhere else. And guess what's in that water? All kinds of little things that you didn't see that are floating in there. So that's how we have a lot of invasive algae, for instance, that come from way far away. Like currents would never bring them here, like Japan or East Asia. And it's mostly from shipping, bringing them here.
So just in case anyone doesn't know, bilge water, I'm worried now I will use the wrong term. Is it ballast water?
I think it's ballast water.
So it's actually ballast water, and it's the water that ships take on to sort of balance out when they're using up fuel, but they're calibrated for a certain weight or something like that. There is something called bilge water, and I think that's like all the water that sort of ends up at the very bottom point of the ship. And I can't imagine that you're allowed to pump that out anywhere because it's always full of oil and all sorts of other things. So
and it's disgusting.
Just in case my former coworkers are listening to me.
Yes. Hey man, even when you're an expert in something, we are still human. And this is something I work a lot with youth, and it's something that I talk about a lot with them. Like our idea that being an expert means you should be perfect and right all the time is so contrary to science, honestly, because, in science, it doesn't matter how good you are, how smart you are, how great your hypothesis is. You're going to fail. You're going to make mistakes. And that's just part of the process. And it's okay. So it's okay to accidentally say bilge water when you mean ballast water.
That's another part of science communication too. It's like better to know what you're talking about or go back and correct yourself.
It's okay to do that.
Or, hey, let's look that up together. That's what I got really good at when I didn't know the answer to something. It's like, let's look that up together. And then it's a discussion about what is a good source and what is not a good source for information.
Yes, exactly. We have this discussion with Alexa in our house all the time.
Cite your sources, Alexa.
Exactly. That's funny. How old is this article?
But yeah, is Alexa just drawing her information from Wikipedia, James? That's what I want to know.
Sometimes it'll say it's from Wikipedia or Wiktionary, but other times it's just like, I found this on the web.
Yeah.
Not good job. Enough.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we should probably wrap up. Any other critters that you thought about in advance that you want to make sure that we cover this time? Otherwise, we'll just have to have you back on.
Oh no, that'd be terrible. I mean, man, those crystal foxes. Honestly, there's got to be someone who's written some from a biologist perspective and has gone really deep down that rabbit hole because I want to know more about them.
Yeah, I found, so this is something I actually do. Most of my Star Wars Insider pieces are speculative natural history, but my first article was about porgs. And I found something online, at least someone had written about the Thalo sirens, which are like land whales.
The elephant seal thing.
The elephant seal, right, sort of.
Ones that are getting milked for blue milk?
Yeah.
Green milk.
That's right.
Green milk. Ooh,
I blocked that part of it out, honestly. But yeah. So, talking about, it's like elephant seals. It's partially like whales. It's partially like this. And something that we learned in our Comic-Con panel from Fawn Davis, who used to work at ILM, was that George Lucas himself said everything should be recognizable within a few seconds. Obviously, these are aliens, but you don't want anything so unrecognizable people can't like immediately put it into some sort of I understand this category. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what taunts us, people that think about things like this, is because it's not so different. Like I'm also watching the show The Witcher right now, and I don't do this analysis when I'm watching that show because it's so different. Yeah. But in Star Wars, it's like, I think I know something about that because I know about puffins,
No, that's actually an excellent point. And it's like, it's like this, but is it? And that's what gets our curiosity sparked and wakes us up at 2 a.m, wondering about these things. Thank you very much, George Lucas. Yeah. It's easy to speculate because of that.
So if you got to say, hey, I want to designate this part of a planet or this planet as a conservation area or national park or wildlife refuge, what area do you think you'd pick?
So I would definitely pick a planet or area of the planet that has the most biodiversity, and also that biodiversity is in trouble. Either that or, an area where it has an ecosystem or biodiversity that's really important to the regulation of climate or other systems on that planet. This is actually a great question because it's a question that we ask ourselves all the time, right? There's limited time, limited man or woman power, limited resources, limited money to conserve everything. And it's just unrealistic to be able to conserve everything. And so conservationists, it's like, what do we put our time and money towards, right? Who do we choose to conserve and who do we let go? And so there's no clearly defined answer to that question, but either one of those options I think would be a really good option. So either go for the most biodiversity or the most important for, keystone species, et cetera, for that particular ecosystem or planet biosphere.
So here's a little bit of optimism. I watched Return of the Jedi last night because I'm writing an article about Ewoks, and trying to figure out, is Endor the planet or the moon, had me listening more carefully than I have before. And at some point, the Emperor himself calls it the sanctuary moon. And I'm sure James will ruin this for me by knowing what it actually means. But I've decided that means Endor is a nature preserve. And they knew that they were putting up, this bunker and this shield generator, but they acknowledged that the rest of it was like a sanctuary moon.
Maybe it's a sanctuary because it's protecting them.
I mean, because they do a good job, right? They certainly could have done worse to that planet.
True.
Putting in one bunker and having one AT-AT walk around or whatever. They did a pretty good job, not just bulldozing the entire thing to build their shield generator. So.
And they leave the Ewoks fairly alone, right? Until they start attacking them. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the other thing that really stuck out to me, was that it's unclear if the Ewoks were going to fight back anyway, or if they were just laying low and sort of like, all right,
it could
they're
just
not
be
bothering
like,
us.
We'll stay in our area, you stay in your area, and we won't kill each other immediately.
Right.
But,
until they knew the whole story.
Well, I think they probably, after a few first contact things where Ewoks got killed, I'm sure they were just like, if we get a chance to pick a couple of these guys off, we'll do it. But we don't want them coming after us.
Turning it around back to optimistic again, maybe the Ewoks were just too cute to be killed. We do this, right, in conservation too. We have our flagship species. We've got our pandas, right? We have our koalas, all these cute animals that people want to rescue and don't want harm to come to, right? So maybe they're just like, oh God, I feel really weird slaughtering these adorable, sentient little teddy bears. So they just have sticks and they live in
it's fine.
So let's just leave them over there, shall we?
It just reminds me of a story that I think one of the authors of one of the older books came up with for why the Ewoks were so cute, was that they were actually genetically engineered to be cute living teddy bears. And there was a shipment of them on board a ship that crashed on the moon of Endor. And the only other survivor of that crash besides the Ewoks was a golden droid that took care of them and helped them on their way. And then thus when 3PO arrives, they see him as a golden god because in the past they have this cultural memory of the golden droid that helped them start their civilization. I forget where it's from. It could be something that's not even canon for that time. It could just be something that an author wanted to have but wasn't allowed to.
Interesting. I really like that potential explanation. Well, Sam, can you tell us a little bit about how you got interested in conservation biology and a bit about your career track?
But it had always been my intention ever since I was a little kid to become a scientist, and specifically to be a conservation biologist. I grew up outside of Yellowstone National Park. And so I was completely immersed in incredible nature, right? I mean, grizzly bears, wolves, eagles. I mean, it was pretty epic. That was like the ultimate backyard. And so I knew that I wanted to do something to not only study that and be immersed in that, but also to protect it. And so life happens, right? You don't always end up where you think you're going to be immediately. And so I embarked on other career paths, but I went back to school in my 30s to become a scientist. And here I am outside of school, my first job was, I basically landed my dream job with the National Park Service at Cabrillo National Monument. And what I do there is I get to both do science and then educate and communicate about science, my two great loves.
I mean, clearly you've thought about this before, but like, how can Star Wars, how can fandom of science fiction help with that, help bring awareness?
Yeah, I think Star Wars can help bring awareness to science and specifically biology by anyone who is intrigued by any of the amazing species or cool creatures that you see in Star Wars. I know when I was little, I was completely obsessed with tauntauns. I wanted to ride one so badly, and I loved the little noises they made. And as a little kid, I used to think about like, oh, I wonder what it is that they eat. And, I wonder what it would take to be able to tame one, to ride one. And, do they live in herds? And these sorts of questions, that certainly can correlate to leading people to investigating real amazing life that lives on planet Earth right now. Did we just have a tauntaun off, James?
Oh, tauntaun off. There we go. So where can we find you on social media, or do you have any upcoming publications or things that you want to talk about?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. I do a lot of really fun and informative free public programs at Cabrillo National Monument. And we've got a bunch of really cool things coming up here. So one thing I'd like to invite everybody to attend is the 24-hour Bio Blitz that's happening at the end of April. And what that is it's basically crowdsourcing science. So we use the community to help us catalog biodiversity. So you can come out to Cabrillo, use the free app iNaturalist, and catalog every living thing you see, and scientists will help you identify it. And this gives you an opportunity to actually be at Cabrillo before and after hours, which, you can only do if you're conducting research, basically, or doing some other work for the park. So that's pretty cool. It's fun. It gets you out, gets you looking and observing cool animals and plants, but it also contributes to real science. So that's free. You can find that information on our website, and that's nps.gov/CABR, as in CABR for Cabrillo. And then I'm constantly giving public programs as well. So every Thursday I do a snake talk at Cabrillo, where I bring in one of our live ambassador snakes and give people a positive experience with snakes. Right now, we're doing an awesome gray whale unit with a Science Explorers Club cart. So it's a mobile science cart that we wheel around the park because it's gray whale season. And we've been seeing them migrate past pretty much every day from Cabrillo. So you can come out and talk gray whales with me and my youth apprentices who are changing the world. These girls are amazing.
Wait, are they Sith apprentices?
They are definitely not. I'm going to go with, they're so wise. I'm going to go with Jedi Consulars. That's what I'm going to go with. Are you saying I'm a Sith, James?
No, not at all. No.
He didn't say it, but it's kind of there.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm their master, right? Like, I guess I should call them Padawans. Maybe that will take the confusion out of this. Okay. So lots of fun stuff like that. And then the one last thing I actually wanted to mention was I do a free STEM summer camp for girls aged 9 through 16. It's really awesome. It's led by female scientists for budding young female scientists, and registration opens for that at the end of March. So anyone here have girls ages 9 through 16, definitely sign up for Ecologic. There's nothing quite like it. It's basically the summer camp that I wish I had when I were that age.
What's the website for that?
You can find it on Cabrillo's website. The summer camp is called Ecologic.
Great. We'll make sure we put that link in the show notes for people.
Awesome. One last thing. You can follow me personally at Steam Boss Sammy. That's Sammy with SAMMIE on Instagram.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here. We could obviously talk about this all night.
This was a delight. Thank you so much for having me. This was super fun.
That wraps up this episode of Star Warsologies. We want to thank our guest, Sam Wynns, and we want to thank all of you for listening. If you have an idea for a topic for Star Warsologies or know an expert we should interview, let us know at Star Warsologies on Twitter and Instagram, or at Star Warsologies, that's Star Wars OLOGIES @gmail.com. Please also rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite service.
No topic is off limits, even the taxation of trade routes and outlying systems. We are part of the Skywalking Network, where you can also find a variety of other great shows about Star Wars, Disney, and Marvel, including classic Marvel Star Wars comics, Totally Tell Me Everything, the Neverland Clubhouse, and the flagship show, Skywalking Through Neverland. There's also a new YouTube show, Today in Star Wars History. You can find all of these shows at skywalkingnetwork.com.
See you next time on Star Warsologies, when we will discuss religion and Star Wars.